Hi, everyone. My name is Sheetal Deer. I'm the Senior Crisis Campaigner at Amnesty International USA, and this is Crisis and Rapid Response Campaigning in your community. I'd like to welcome everybody. Just some quick introductions. Once again, my name is Sheetal Deer. I am the Senior Crisis Campaigner here at Amnesty International USA. Today, we'll be going through a crisis campaigning and rapid response workshop to get LCs, also known as legislative coordinators, in tune and ready for the work ahead. Our objectives are varied, and I'll go over them in a moment with you. So the purpose of this training is to have participants develop a foundational understanding of both crisis and rapid response campaigning. As you all might know, crisis and rapid response campaigning are a particular type of campaigning at AIUSA. When you say those things, it means something very specific, and it engages specific parts of the Amnesty machine. So this is to just talk you through that. The objective of today's workshop and webinar is to make sure that you guys, legislative coordinators, will be able to run your own crisis campaigns and use the rapid response techniques that we talk about to achieve human rights impact. The process is this webinar. Thank you all, by the way, for taking the time and for coming today. Appreciate it. Just to bring us back to a central core mission and value statement, Amnesty International's mission is as follows. Amnesty International is a Nobel Peace Prize winning global movement of more than 7 million people who campaign for a world where human rights are enjoyed by all. The organization investigates and exposes abuses, educates and mobilizes the public, and works to protect people wherever justice, freedom, truth, and dignity are denied. The reason I paused earlier was I was just thinking about the gravity of the mission, especially in the times that we're confronted with today. It just takes me a minute every time to center myself when I'm doing this work, and I would hope that you guys take those minutes for yourselves and bring yourselves back to the original mission, because it is really what guides us. It's kind of our light in the darkness that helps us kind of navigate what are clearly kind of trying and crisis-laden times. So yeah, here's the mission. Try to remember it if you can. What is a campaign? So as you all may know, in May 2017, the campaigns unit was founded at AIUSA, and the 7-person team is charged with running campaigns, which are highly focused projects, meaning they are on one specific topic. They are time-bound, meaning they can be from anywhere 1 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 years, but there is an endpoint. It's not like figuring out our resolving the issue of racial justice, which clearly will happen on an arc over several years. Campaigns are time-bound projects. C, they're winnable, which means that there's like a specific objective that we want to achieve. So it's holding X, Y, and Z person accountable. It's passing X, Y, and Z legislation in the case of LCs. D, campaigns are strategically planned, coordinated, and communicated out to achieve explicitly defined external goals and objectives. Oftentimes, our campaigns and the campaigns unit are informed by the expertise of our coworkers who work in different departments, such as government relations. I know that LCs work with government relations folks often, such as research, field, obviously, O&A. We try to make our campaigns not only inclusive, but inclusive of the expertise that lies outside of our unit. So in terms of explicitly defined external goals and objectives, we always try to take into consideration the goals and objectives of other units when we're doing this work as well. So that's just something to consider. A campaign can use a range of tactics. That's research, press work, social media, government relations, engaging member leaders like you all and field organizers. It can be city or state. It can be national or global. And by that, I mean that campaigns usually have a scope. So our End Gun Violence campaign is focused on movement in New Orleans and Chicago. So that's a city and state. National, so our refugees campaign, which is running for the next few years, is obviously national in scope, is working in several states to make movement, or global. So our Rohingya campaign on the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar was global in terms of scope and in terms of partnerships. So we worked with a lot of sections abroad to make movement in that campaign. Other perspectives and lenses to consider when you're doing the work. One is global coordination. As I was talking about earlier, we try to make sure that AIUSA members really do align their strategy with the global movement. One of the best things about working at Amnesty International is that we are, in fact, the premier human rights organization worldwide. So knowing where your counterparts are in the UK or in the country of origin in terms of the issue, or there are over 70 sections worldwide. So kind of consorting with and making sure that you're consulting with people abroad who are also participating in the movement, who can also kind of make changes or use tactics that maybe don't work in a US context, but could work brilliantly in another context. That's just something to consider and something to employ. It's something that I really recommend people think about when they are considering starting a campaign. B is gender integration. As you all know, gender integration has become a huge part of the lens with which we see everything we do and the work we do. And we really encourage you to consider gender norms and stereotypes, ensuring that there's visibility of non-cis males in your storytelling by expanding your understanding of gender in all human rights campaigning. It really, really is vital to the work and to inclusivity. Speaking of, that brings me to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. This is called IDEA here. So considering whether the issue of your campaign addresses and affects groups differently, are the solutions you're proposing rooted in equity? So something that I think communities and campaigners oftentimes not have a hard time with, but really have to emphasize, is making sure that the storytelling that you're doing or the work that you're doing doesn't represent just one voice, but really does speak to all voices and could apply to all communities. And so really taking that into consideration for LCs in particular, when you're approaching an elected, maybe doing some homework. Obviously, I know that you guys do this, but doing some homework on, the constituents in that person's mandate, and seeing that the solutions that you're proposing really do apply to the people that they work for and with. For example, say you're working to push legislation in Arkansas versus pushing legislation in Southern California, you're going to make different arguments, and the solutions that you propose, just because of the constituents that live in both of those communities, are dramatically different. You want to make sure that what you're putting out there really does apply to as many people as possible. Amnesty International Crisis Prevention and Response. So as you all know, Amnesty International mobilizes AI supporters and members to take action on human rights crises around the world. We also pressure U.S. officials, foreign governments, and international organizations to protect human rights defenders and civilians displaced by violence, provide humanitarian relief, and ensure accountability for human rights violations. These are the guiding principles of crisis prevention and response work at AI. Generally speaking, these aren't particular to AIUSA. This is directly from the IS, the International Secretariat. So what's a crisis? Great question. A crisis is urgent, meaning whatever's happening is burgeoning or erupting in the immediate. B, we have determined that crises campaigns should align with our priority campaigns. Right now, as of October 2018, our priority campaigns are end gun violence and refugees. A crisis response needs to contribute to organizational goals. So there are 5 organizational priorities right now that range from, running campaigns to growth and membership and development of members. We want to make sure that whatever our response is in a crisis situation is contributing to those overarching goals. We want to make sure that AIUSA has the potential for impact when we're running a crisis campaign. So basically whatever we're doing will work. That we're capable of doing it, that we're empowered to do it, that the policies of Amnesty International allow us that runway and that road through which to travel. And then lastly, AIUSA involvement presents a clear value add in the space. So as I was talking about Amnesty being the premier human rights organization worldwide, we get to enjoy that lane a lot. And I think something that's really important to consider is that AIUSA involvement really does add that international perspective. A lot of times the issues that we work on are pretty crowded in nature. And as we work through them, there's going to be a lot of voices in the space, and we want to make sure to never parachute in or take over, but also offer what our unique perspective is, which is the international perspective. What is crisis campaigning? So in domestic situations, crisis campaigning is the vehicle for the public's resistance overall. And in international situations, crisis campaigning aims to have an impact on human rights violations on a massive scale. So to zero in on that a little bit and focus on, what does that actually mean? In domestic situations, crisis campaigning usually means using our loudspeaker to speak for the human rights movement or the human rights angle of something. So for example, a domestic crisis that happened somewhat recently was the Muslim ban coming down. And we went into like mode 1, which was kind of all hands on deck. And we used pretty much every resource at our disposal to make sure that electeds, to make sure that, the UN, to make sure that news outlets, everybody understood where the human rights movement stood on the issue of the Muslim ban. And so we were the vehicle for the public's resistance overall, making public comments, doing demonstrations, convening people with communication strategies, things like that, to really move the narrative forward. And then in international situations, crisis campaigning aims to have an impact on human rights violations on a massive scale. So an example of that is the work that we did on the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. So we know that there's an ethnic cleansing going on in Myanmar. Our crisis responders and researchers are the people who have really validated that nomenclature and have made that official. So that's something to consider. So in international situations, oftentimes when we're lobbying government officials or, international bodies for change, it's usually off of our own research and off of our own crisis research that comes out of the shop in London. So that's just something to consider. Types of crises at AIUSA. There's a national security incident. So that's one type of crisis. So for example, like if another, knock on wood, never happen again, but if another 9/11 were to occur or something on that scale. Secondly, human rights violations on a massive scale. So this is, once again, the Rohingya, or, family separation and deportation is a really good example of number 2, a type of crises. Legislation on a fast track. This is where LCs come in handy. This is where you guys really, really have the opportunity to shine, and where we will engage your help very actively in crisis campaigns if it's to fight against legislation that's on a fast track. And then lastly, powerful opportunities to amplify good. These are usually tend to be like HRD cases or human rights defenders cases, or if we see something happening, a lot of our community sponsorship work within the Refugees Campaign can be and could be qualified as a crisis if we were to take it on as that kind of tactical campaign. So you are the solution. I really do believe that members at Amnesty are really our strongest asset. You guys are the reason, we all have jobs. You guys are the reason we're here, to empower you. So just something to remember when you're doing these campaigns, you want to set a moral compass. So what do you want to get done? What's your North Star? What are you trying to achieve here? You want to amplify heroes and human rights defenders. There's been, a plethora of marketing and research done on, narratives and what kind of narratives work. And we've realized here at Amnesty USA that amplifying heroes and human rights defenders, telling a positive story as opposed to focusing on the negative, really, really works. And so we want to encourage you to amplify heroes and human rights defenders wherever possible, and also centering, the stories of the people who are impacted by whatever human rights crises you're trying to address. C is to provide a different solution. This goes along with B. We really encourage folks to try and offer up kind of a yes and, rather than just going to a legislator or a member of Congress and complaining about a certain policy, saying hey, we don't agree with X, Y, and Z policy for A, B, and C reason, but we could offer you this in lieu of is really how we want to be kind of ambassadors of positivity and a good brand, along with, you know, everything else that we do. And then D, hold perpetrators accountable. Here at AIUSA, especially in terms of crisis campaigning, we do think it's important to hold actors responsible who participate in pursuing or persecuting people based on, you know, unethical lenses. And so we want to make sure that perpetrators are held accountable. But in general, we want to be the solution, not the people just complaining about the problem. So that's what this slide is about. So when LCs engage in a crisis, this is for you guys specifically, you may be asked to engage in your role as an LC when the ask is targeted at a member of Congress. That happens a lot with us. You know, we're considering a campaign on sales of arms to the Saudi Arabian government, and we might be kind of coming out with a specific, like, hey, we don't want, you know, Susan Collins to vote this way on said thing. And if you're an LC from Maine, we would try to get you to kind of lobby Susan Collins. So yeah, the ask is targeted at a governor or state elected official. That happens a lot, saying, you know, we're undertaking a significant amount of work on immigration detention on the municipal level. But, you know, if there were a point at which we were like, hey, we want to get Texas to just say no immigration detention in our state, which I realize is totally a hypothetical and not realistic. But if we were to do that, we would obviously engage LCs. And then lastly, the ask is targeted at local officials. So this is all obviously in your bailiwick and in your training. But these are the times at which you'd probably hear from me in your inbox. Once again, Sheetal Deer, Senior Crisis Campaigner, asking for your help. And if you could. Organizing. So when you're doing this work, it's really, really important to be in touch with your field organizers. They are your lifeline to the organization. You can always email me, but keeping field organizers in the loop, because they're kind of the celluloid kind of membrane that keep everybody informed and everybody together and on the same page. It's really important. Secondly, be in touch with your state leadership team. You guys know who these people are, but your ACs, SACs, SDPACs, all these folks are there to be with you on the same page and to kind of carry out our campaigning goals. And so as long as everybody is coordinated, I think we can have just much more impact. And then be in touch with your staff point on MLT's team. So you guys know who those people are. Just once again, all of this is in service of being organized, being coordinated, and coming forth with kind of a united front. You know, sometimes there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen here, but really what we aim for is to have clear, simple solutions to what can oftentimes be really intangible and difficult problems. And in order to do that, we need to keep a clear head and be communicative and open with each other so that we can present a united front to the people who we're lobbying and to the hearts and minds that we're trying to change and kind of get into our pockets. So that's something to consider. Yeah, so breakout session, identify your toolbox. This is something I usually do in an in-person presentation, but I did think it was important to have this in here. Write down what you have in your back pocket or your power map or the people that you know that or levers that you feel comfortable pushing if and when you have kind of crisis work to do. And just keep that in mind as I'm talking either about rapid response or crisis campaigning, and just see it might be a helpful exercise to keep that toolbox. Take 5 minutes, pause the webinar, write down that toolbox so that you can see how your life as an LC would play out in some of these crisis situations or rapid response situations. And then if you ever want, I'm obviously always available to talk through your toolbox or help you kind of identify tools that you might not know are in your back pocket at present. So press plus advocacy equals impact. This is probably one of the most important slides in the entire presentation. I would encourage you guys to kind of double down on like a couple of these tactics as opposed to trying to do all of these things when you do everything. You know, when you have like 10 people in one state doing 10 different things, it can oftentimes dilute the message. Whereas if you had, 10 people writing letters to the editor and all the editors, they're around the water cooler and see that Amnesty is really making a push, it can have more of an impact. But I'm going to go through each of these and kind of give you concrete examples of how we've used these tactics in the past. And then obviously always offer myself up as someone to talk through these kinds of initiatives with, if you're considering them to run a crisis campaign. So A is letters to the editor plus legislative movement. LTEs, we'll go through a skill build in a second, but I'm sure you guys are familiar with them. You want them to be short, you want them to be concise, you want them to be timely. Usually it's responding to an incident, or it could be responding to an article that's in that specific paper, plus legislative movement. So the press element of this is the letter to the editor, and the advocacy is the legislative movement that's happening. Oftentimes you want real live events to be influenced by what you're doing. So if you wrote a letter to the editor that was like particularly effective while legislation was on a fast track, when you went to said member of Congress to lobby them on, legislation on a fast track, you would kind of bring the newspaper and you would say, hey, even this newspaper thought that, this issue warranted this real estate in this paper, which gives you more of a, more of a robust platform from which to advocate for the issue and for yourself. Press matters. That stuff does matter. I'm a former news producer. I've launched several newsrooms and shows, and as a result, I've seen the power of the press, and the press does matter. I think influencers are influenced by it. They take their cues from what the collective is saying and doing, and I think by engaging heavily with the press, you can oftentimes kind of make moves in a really positive direction for our work. B is targeting members of Congress. So obviously this involves you guys, LCs, and a campaign stunt. So one time recently, we were doing something, I believe, on family separation, and we targeted a bunch of members in Congress online, and we're like, hey, at so-and-so, at Schumer, we're going to be on the White House lawn protesting X, such and such thing on the zero tolerance policy. Meet us there at this time. And so a bunch of staffers met us, and we kind of pulled off a campaign stunt. So then our staffer, or those like legislative staffers, were exposed to the issue. They saw that we were putting attention and time and money behind it, and they just took the issue more seriously. We've really made some really impressive strides in our refugee work as a result of like directly targeting members of Congress and kind of calling them out. Since there's so many constituents care about this issue, it's been better to kind of run that work. C is legislative advocacy plus targeted Facebook and print ads. This is a tactic that we used. We doubled up on last December for our Myanmar campaign. We'd been doing legislative advocacy for a while to get a House bill passed on humanitarian aid being sent to Bangladesh and to specifically assist the Rohingya. And then we put a bunch of targeted Facebook ads in the 5 House districts that we were really targeting to get this bill passed. And it actually worked. I mean, the language around the ad was kind of like, we know that you've done so much already, but as you go home for Christmas, like, please remember that a lot of these people can't be in their homes. And like, stand with us, stand with them. It was something along those lines. And if you ever need help talking through or thinking through the marketing or the language of these ads, we're also very available to do that. Demonstrations plus important dates and anniversaries. So an example of this is the Muslim ban. So on the 2nd anniversary of the Muslim ban, which I believe was October 19th of last year, we held a big demonstration in front of, I think in L'Enfant Plaza, if I recall correctly. This is a huge opportunity to kind of coordinate with coalition groups that maybe you haven't had a need to reach out to thus far. I know that LCs don't do as much of that work, but I know that field organizers really do double down around important dates and anniversaries to reach out to coalition groups. And maybe this is, if you have an important date or an anniversary coming up for a human rights issue that you care about, it's oftentimes a really good thing to rally around. E, introduce local resolutions and have a national press strategy. This is something this is a tactic we're going to be using in our family detention work in Q1 of 2019. We're going to be trying to get local elected officials to kind of pass legislation in their municipalities that guarantees that no new immigration detention sites will be built in their districts. And what we're hoping is that so we have 6 target states. We're hoping that enough people in enough states will, like newly elected people after the midterms, will get these bills passed. And then as a result, we'll be pitching heavily to national press outlets to say, like, hey, Washington Post, it's one thing to report on family detention and separation. It's another thing that Amnesty has gotten, 10 local elected officials to pass these bills, which is basically representative of, a certain amount of the state saying, kind of not in my backyard. So that's something that we are doing with our immigration detention work. I realize that was a bit of a complicated explanation, but if anyone needs clarity on that, just contact me. I can talk you through it. F, local media plus federal movement on legislation. This is kind of E, but just switched. So yeah, local media, if there are, a lot of people, we have a thing, I'm sure as a lot of you LCs are familiar with, like persuadable purples seem to be a population that we're constantly courting. Persuadable purples oftentimes read local media. So that's something to consider if there's something on a fast track, getting kind of a local reporter or a beat reporter to write about how that would impact, kind of members on a local level or people on a local level can it really packs a punch. And then lastly, there's Rotary, religious, and student groups plus IS outputs. The IS, or the International Secretariat, oftentimes follows up if they're following a crisis, follows up every couple months with a new output or something to rally around. I, as a crisis campaigner here, I'm extremely grateful for that. Oftentimes, it gives you a reason to reach out to your coalition partners. It gives you a reason to reach out to the legislator that you're working with or the elected that you're working with, and say, like, hey, new information has come about. We're still pushing this solution to the problem. We'd like you to hear the story, things like that. So yeah, I'd really like to just emphasize LCs have a huge, huge role in how we get work done here, but press plus advocacy, you guys are obviously on the advocacy element, and our public affairs department is available and ready to you to help figure out the press side. I really do think that's where we can have impact and make moves. So something to consider. Skill build, letter to the editor. So since this is through a webinar, it's not going to be as one-on-one in terms of the attention that I can give you, but there is a worksheet on the Member Hub site that can help you work through how to do letters to the editor. So in case you don't know, letters to the editor are short letters. They're usually 250 words or less. They're either responding to a published piece that appeared in the paper or raising an issue of concern. Best practices for letters to the editor. One is make it timely. So when possible, respond to a published story. Something that I do often on a lot of the issues that I work on is I have op-eds with kind of Amnesty's stance just in my back pocket that are already written, and I leave open like a couple of places where you can insert the relevant or germane details from the day of news story, just so that there's not that much that you need to go through to kind of get something posted and pitched when the story does come down. So I'm just saying, like, have something in your back pocket where you're already maybe talking about solutions in Amnesty's position, and then when you kind of see the story that you want to respond to, you can just like slap a couple sentences in there and send it. So you want to make it as timely as possible. The second thing is stick to a few points. Use clear, simple language. I'm sure, as all of you know, even when you're lobbying people, the kind of $64,000 word doesn't always work. SAT words tend to make people confused as opposed to help them understand the issue. Especially with LCs, you guys want to provide a call to action for Congress or your governor or your state or local official when you're doing a letter to the editor. And then lastly, just feel free to touch base with us. You can reach us at media@aiusa.org, and our public affairs professionals will kind of help you work through any sort of sticky wickets you might be presented with your letter to the editor. So a sample structure, as you can see here, this is about the Muslim ban, this letter to the editor. The primary point that we wanted to make was it's unconscionable that people from several Muslim majority countries are blocked from entering the US. We wanted to back up our claims and demonstrate the human rights impact. Trump's ban on refugees and visitors from these countries, it's senseless and discriminatory, so that's backing up our claim. And then the human rights impact, right? This ruling has only added to the confusion, fear, and anxiety facing millions of people. And then lastly, the call to action. I would like to thank Senators X, Y, and Z for supporting legislation that nullifies EO, or I call on Senators A, B, and C to intervene and stop this ban once and for all. So yeah, that language definitely is relevant for LCs and something to take into consideration when you're writing your next letter to the editor. So one example that I wanted to talk with you guys in terms of crisis campaigning is the last big international crisis campaign we undertook, which was Myanmar. So as many of you know, over 680 Rohingya have fled across the border from Myanmar to Bangladesh due to the relentless campaign of violence that's been waged. It's ethnic cleansing. We did the research and have the research to back up that claim. We used all of the levers of the organization to make change on this issue. One, public affairs, like worked with press and digital, government relations. We lobbied heavily. I think Rohingya was like the second ask on the list for Lobby Day. International Secretariat coordination. So there were a lot of new outputs coming out of the IS consistently on the issue. We had people on the ground more often than we didn't. So that was good in terms of just getting fresh information, whether that be getting fresh information to the press or getting fresh information to the senators and electeds that we were lobbying to get our kind of aid bill passed. Field amplified the issue at regionals, which we were thankful for. Research put out reports around which members and supporters were organized. And then lastly, different members took up the cause in different ways. People gave concerts, we folded does, we lobbied on the Hill. So once again, this comes back to you are the solution. I mean, Amnesty would be nothing without our members. You guys really are the driving force behind a lot of our efficacy. And so in order to champion kind of human rights defense worldwide, we really do need you guys. Yeah, and we're here to support you. So now moving on to rapid response. I refer to rapid response oftentimes as RR, so don't be confused by that. It's just it's a shorthand. Rapid response is a mode of campaigning. It is not thematic or issue-oriented in nature. It's usually based on a case or a policy development. So rapid response, as you can assume and guess, literally means just doing things quickly. I'll go through that a little bit more as we move forward. How does rapid response differ from crisis campaigning? So crisis campaigning typically focuses on a large-scale issue, while rapid response focuses on a microcosm of that issue. So for example, we have run crisis campaigns on family separation and detention, while we've also run literally rapid response case campaigns on asylum seekers who are, facing family separation issues at the border. And so, for example, crisis campaigning is the family separation detention issue. The case campaign that we ran was a microcosm of that issue. It illustrated all the problems with the bigger picture crisis campaign, but we had a specified objective in terms of the case, whether it be to get a certain person out of asylum, or to get a certain person in an asylum hearing, or to get them out of detention. Rapid response cases tend to be domestically focused, which allows AIUSA to have an immediate impact. That's been the case so far as I've run the work for the last, year and a half and change. But this isn't the mandate of rapid response work. We ostensibly could do rapid response work on an international scale. It just, I have yet to see that come across my desk. So our cases are shorter than crisis campaigns, so they're 2 weeks. Usually within the first 48 hours, we kind of convene, we get a plan together, and dedicate, a concentrated number of resources over the first kind of 2 weeks, whereas crisis campaigns can last for months, even years, depending. And then rapid response campaigning is much more flexible. Use what you have in your back pocket to make the most impact. So this harkens back to the whole toolbox thing that I was advocating for you guys to do before. Yeah, rapid response campaigning is when you really use your toolbox, when you figure out what's in my back pocket, what can I do in the immediate, what can I do well. You don't want to do 10 things badly, you want to do 2 things well. So just double down on those tactics and kind of make it work for yourself. Also know that we are always, always here to talk through with you if you need us. Checklist for rapid response. So we know that rapid response, as per the title, can go pretty quickly. And so just a checklist to keep in mind: has the information been vetted by a researcher? So, one of the many things that AI can lean on is our brand, but the reason our brand is so robust and so well respected is because our research is extremely, backed up and checked over and over and over and over again. You want to make sure that the information that you're putting out there is factually accurate. Otherwise, you can run into a lot of trouble and you can tarnish the brand, which obviously none of us want to do. Is the case time sensitive? Is what you're doing, does it require this mode of campaigning? For many in the organization isn't their natural mode. It's my job, so I feel comfortable doing rapid response, but not everybody does, so keep that in mind. Can you run the campaign in under 2 weeks? Can AI USA make an impact in under 2 weeks? These are really important questions to ask yourself. Sometimes rapid response, even though it seems like the easiest or the shiniest penny to pick up, let's make that a quarter. Maybe the shiniest quarter to pick up. It's not always like the smartest move. It's not always the most strategic. You might want to go for the long game. Does the case fit into AI USA's broader work? So this harkens back to some of the same things on crisis campaigning. Anytime I undertake a crisis campaign, I want to make sure that whatever we're doing does feed into the broader objectives of AI USA and the organization. So that's something to consider. My recommendation is to limit rapid response campaigning to standard outputs. So press, digital expressions of solidarity. These are things that AI USA does well. It's things that we know how to do, and things that I would encourage you to do, things that you know how to do well and quickly in a rapid response scenario. It's usually about a person or a policy change. So like a case study or a case campaign is usually about, 1 to however many people who are undergoing a human rights violation that elucidates or clarifies or is, a perfect example of a larger trend that we're fighting against on kind of an organization-wide level. Or a policy change, meaning, a continuing resolution happened for the budget process, with Congress, and as a result of the CR, they have to decide these 6 things quickly, and we go into rapid response mode to make sure one of the things passes in our favor. So that's another example. Dynamics of rapid response. So one thing is that groups oftentimes use rapid response tactics to build their own campaigns. The second thing to consider is we're here to amplify your voice. So if you've done something, if you want us to know, like we were talking about earlier in terms of organizing, there was a slate called Organizing where we encouraged you to keep in touch with not only your field organizers, but SDPACs, ACs, SACs, and then obviously your contact at MLT. If you're doing something on a rapid response case and you want us to know about it and you want us to help you out, we're here to amplify your voice. Tell us what you're doing so that we can work with it. Internally, we tend to focus on digital press and field. So field is expressions of solidarity, demonstrations, candlelight vigils, things like that. Press is kind of telling the story, putting out a release, and then digital is, digital activism and mobilization, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with at this juncture. Lastly, this is your campaign. If a group has specific access to one outlet, utilize it. We support you entirely in what you're doing. Remember that you guys, you are the lifeblood here. So just remember that. One thing is that in a rapid response situation, specifically for LCs, you guys might not have the time to schedule meetings with the electeds. That's okay. That's totally okay. In those situations, I would recommend doing a materials drop-off and making sure that you can take a photo either before or after in the office when you do so that not only can we give you credit for it, but we can put that into our records in terms of work that was done. What happens after a rapid response campaign? Great question. So usually we move the work into a long-term programmatic home. There are several things that we may do after. These are examples. One is you can engage in direct government advocacy and lobby for change when opportunities arise. So, if an issue becomes somewhat dormant, know that that doesn't necessarily mean that the issue goes away. You can just bring it up whenever. It's kind of like a time hook. Second, you can turn the rapid response campaign into a longer term campaign. Usually that requires some sort of finagling and like an end goal and changing your theory of change, but that's totally doable. You can continue support through coalition partners, and that means just kind of handing off the work in a responsible way to partners who are able to continue kind of the pressure and do the work on a daily basis, even if you are not. Or oftentimes member leaders continue the work. For example, the Myanmar Co-Group has continued the work on the Rohingya, even though it's no longer a crisis campaign or a rapid response campaign. So so I'm just going to go through now a couple of case studies just to talk you guys through a couple of things that we've done in rapid response to give you a better idea of the types of rapid response campaigns that we run. So the rapid response campaign after Hurricane Harvey was to ensure that those who came to the U.S. in search of safety and freedom and from persecution were not left without protection in the wake of a natural disaster. We wanted to protect the rights of asylum seekers and migrants while demanding that the U.S. stand by its human rights commitments. So basically, we worked with Texas groups, Grassroots Leadership and Raíces, to write the U.S. government demanding they keep their obligations. We put out a blog. I wrote a blog, I believe. We put it out. We wrote this letter. And we got a response, which was great. It was really, really positive. So now, sorry, I should probably go back. Now, if there is a wake of a natural disaster or something happens, we have this letter kind of from DHS and ICE saying, like, we won't do this again. So we can say, hey, can you take a look at this letter? You promised us you wouldn't do this again. That goes back to holding perpetrators accountable, holding people accountable for what they're doing. The presidential determination. So the presidential determination is something that happens on an annual basis where the president determines and kind of with advocacy groups determines how many refugees or asylum seekers are allowed to enter the states from various countries. There's a number limit that's set to various countries. The PD and the Muslim ban are pretty intimately intertwined. So the rapid response goal here was to pressure members of Congress and the Trump administration to increase the number of refugees proposed to enter the U.S. in the next fiscal year. Our goal was to ensure that refugees who are fleeing violence and persecution could find safety in the U.S. So the PD work in 2017 was, it was a challenge. It was Trump had just gotten into office, and it was hard to kind of lobby people. It was hard, but it was a good faith effort. We used a 2-week push to increase the number of refugees before the beginning of the next fiscal year. We sent out an SMS. We worked with LCs. We worked with you guys to lobby members of Congress. We issued a press statement. We got pickup in the post. We had recommended a ceiling of 75,000. I think it came around 45, if I'm correct, which was a blow, but we made a splash. So at the very least, we energized our base. We got in touch with people who care about the issue, and we were able to create a coalition who clearly were going to invest in the issue and double down on the issue in 2018. And then this year, when the PD came down, we were able to organize and galvanize voices like much more quickly. So that's the other beauty of rapid response, is it shows you who the players are and really who's gonna take up the cause, and who's kind of dedicated to that specific thing. So that's a really positive thing about rapid response campaigning. Even if your specific campaign objective was not achieved, it can do a lot for coordination and coalition building. Astrid and Arturo. So Astrid and Arturo was a case. Our rapid response goal was to grant Astrid's wish for her and her father, Arturo, to be freed from Burks before her 15th birthday. The overarching goal was to end the policy of detaining families for seeking asylum. What did we do? So we did a lot. We took 70,000 actions. We made calls to ICE. We blogged, we issued a press release, we worked with news outlets, coordinated with lawyers, we connected with Astrid's teachers and friends. It was really one of those efforts similar to Myanmar, where we used pretty much every lever of the organization, but we did it quickly because we had a timeline and we had her birthday that we wanted to get her out of jail, get her out of detention by. And on March 28th, which was a little bit after her quinceañera, but still, they were released from Brooks. So it worked. That's the point of this, you guys. It can work if it's concentrated resources, if it's coordinated efforts, and if it's clear communication. I think you can oftentimes really get to the other end of what can seemingly be like intimidating odds. What would you do? So this is something I usually do in person, but our rapid response goal is to reunite Rosemary, who is currently in ICE detention with her family, who was granted asylum in San Diego. Our overarching goal is to end family separation at the border. This is where I'd suggest you use your toolbox and take 5 minutes to figure out what you would do. And then, talk through it with each other, with yourselves, with me, let me know, and we can kind of troubleshoot that way. Report out. This, I believe, is one of the last slides in our presentation, if not the last slide. It's really important that we know when you guys have taken action. If you've met with an elected official, please report your meeting at this address, Amnesty USA /debrief. Stay in touch with your staff contact and or your field organizer. I'm always here to talk you guys through stuff, but they're really the lifeblood of the organization and kind of allow for that central nervous system to contact and stay in communication with each other. So it's really important that you guys report out and let us know what you guys are doing on the ground so that we can support you better. I believe that's it. Once again, signing off. This has been Sheetal Deer. I'm the Senior Crisis Campaigner here at Amnesty International. And I'd like to thank all of you LCs for taking the time to join me today. I hope you have a good one. Thanks so much. Bye.